The blood came from a cut above his eyebrow, the left one, the one that still worked. Daphne Arnett pressed her palm flat against it and told herself to stop shaking. She had worked triage, she had held pressure on worse, but her hands weren't listening. They were wedged into a service corridor off the catering level, the sounds of the gala above them reduced to muffled screaming, and the intermittent crack of gunfire. Prescott Daine sat on a supply crate with his black jacket shredded at the right shoulder, and his expression as unreadable as it had been the first time she'd met him. He was watching her with his one good eye, and there was no fear in it. Only impatience. Daphne. His voice was low, controlled, the way it always was. The cut is superficial. I know, she pressed harder. I'm still checking. She wasn't just checking the cut, and they both knew it. Her clinical brain was running through everything she couldn't see. The right side of his body, where he had no peripheral vision, where a stray bullet could have grazed him without him registering pain through adrenaline, or without him being able to tell, because Prescott Daine at 44, the most feared private intelligence contractor in the country, still refused to acknowledge the limitations of a body that had been blown half apart 6 months ago in a compound outside Kandahar. She was moving her hands down his right arm when he caught her wrist. His grip wasn't rough, it was absolute, like a door closing. I'm not broken, Daphne. His voice dropped until it was barely above the hiss of the ventilation system above them. He pulled her forward until she had to look at him. At the eye patch, the scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw, the jaw itself set hard as the concrete walls around them. Do you think half my vision means half my mind? Daphne's pulse was doing something embarrassing. She could diagnose a tension pneumothorax in the dark. She could not, apparently, manage a basic physiological response to a man who had just killed 2 people in a hotel corridor and was now staring at her like she'd insulted him. She had not meant it as an insult. No, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then he released her wrist and turned to look down the corridor, already somewhere else inside his head. Good, he said, because we are leaving through the loading dock, and I need you to keep up. 3 weeks earlier, Daphne had been finishing a night shift at Toronto General, charting in the break room at 20 past midnight when her brother called. Keaton's voice had that particular quality she had learned to dread over the years. Too casual, slightly too controlled. The voice he used when he was about to tell her something she would hate. There's a situation, he said. The situation was $340,000 in private debt owed to an investment division of Daine Security Group. Debt that Keaton had accumulated over 8 months of catastrophically bad decisions that Daphne had not known about until she was sitting across from a man named Cutter in a government-grey boardroom, being told that the terms of repayment had been restructured. She would serve as a personal medical attendant and household aide to Mr. Prescott Daine, who had recently sustained significant injuries and required continuous qualified medical presence in his private residence. For 1 year, in exchange, Keaton's debt would be considered settled in full. Daphne had looked at Cutter, stocky, careful, a jagged scar across his knuckles, and asked if this was legal. Cutter said it was a contractual arrangement. There was a document, she could have a lawyer review it. She had read nursing textbooks 700 pages long without flinching. She signed the document. The Daine residence occupied the top 2 floors of a building in Yorkville that smelled of money and engineered air. Daphne was given a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, with a view of the city she had no time to appreciate, because on her second morning, she encountered Prescott Daine for the first time without the formal buffer of Cutter standing between them. He was in the kitchen, not being helped to the kitchen, not sitting waiting for assistance. He was standing at the counter with his left hand braced against the granite, reading something on a tablet propped in front of him, drinking black coffee. He was 6'2" and built like someone who had spent 2 decades in conditions that didn't allow for softness. The eye patch was black leather. The scar traced a clean, deliberate line from temple to jaw, like someone had drawn it there on purpose. He did not look up when she walked in. "You're the nursing student," he said. "I finished my clinical hours in March," Daphne said. "Licensing exam in 6 weeks." He turned a page on the tablet. "Cutter will show you the medical supplies. You will not rearrange them. You will not advise me to rest unless I ask for your opinion, and you will not look at me like I am something that needs to be handled." Daphne poured herself a coffee. "How do you take yours?" A pause, black. "You already have one, I can see that." She sat down at the kitchen island. "I'm asking for tomorrow, so I know." He finally looked at her. The left eye was grey, the colour of Lake Ontario in November, and it held the same temperature. "Black," he said again. "Great." She opened her phone and started reviewing her textbook notes. "I'll stay out of your way." He watched her for a moment. Then he went back to his tablet. Daphne learned the rhythms of the penthouse the way she had learned the rhythms of every ward she'd ever worked on. Quietly, through observation, filing information away without making a project of it. Prescott worked 14-hour days at the long steel table that served as his primary workspace. He had adapted. His monitors were positioned at angles that accounted for his blind side. His files were organized to open from the left. He did his physiotherapy in the mornings with a specialist who arrived at the residence and whom Prescott subjected to the same silence he gave everyone else. And he pushed himself hard enough that Daphne, passing the open door of the exercise room, sometimes had to remind herself not to stop and watch. She was not here to watch him. She was not supposed to be developing opinions about him at all. But she was 27, and she had grown up with Keaton, which meant she had a long history of developing opinions about difficult men who refused to acknowledge when they needed help. The trouble arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Harmon Bledsoe, Prescott's CFO of 11 years, a man with the kind of tailored confidence that read as charm at a distance and as something slightly predatory up close, appeared without an appointment. Daphne was in the hallway sorting medical supply deliveries when Bledsoe walked past her without acknowledgement, the way people walk past furniture. She heard him through the open door of the study. Presque, the Meridian account. Bledsoe dropped a folder on the desk with the casualness of someone who had stopped feeling they needed to ask before touching things. "Wolsey's people are circling. I think we need to reconsider the terms of the Vancouver contract. Bring in a third party to manage operations for a bit. Someone outside the firm. You could step back, focus on recovery." "The Vancouver contract runs on my authority," Prescott said. His voice had not changed in volume or tone. "It will continue to do so, and Renard Wolsey can circle whatever he likes. His access to our operations runs through you. Make sure that access remains at the appropriate level of nothing." Bledsoe leaned against the edge of the desk. Daphne could see his profile from the hallway. He was smiling in the way people smile when they are not actually amused. "The board is going to ask questions, Presque. They're going to want to see that operations are." "Thank you, Harmon," Prescott said. "That will be all." The smile held. Bledsoe picked up the folder. He said something low that Daphne didn't catch, and then he left the study and walked past her in the hallway. And this time he did look at her. A long, assessing look that made her glad she had a box of medical supplies and something to do with her hands. After he left, she heard it, the sharp sound of something heavy being swept off a surface, then silence. She waited 30 seconds, then she walked into the study. The contents of a file folder were spread across the floor. Prescott was at the window, his back to her, one hand braced on the glass. His shoulders were rigid. Daphne crouched and began collecting the papers. "Leave those," his voice was flat. "I have them," she said. She kept going. "Daphne," the word came out like a door hinge under pressure. "I said leave them." He turned. She stood up with the papers and met his gaze across the room. In 4 years of nursing placements, she had faced patients who were furious, who were humiliated, who were in the specific pain of people who had never needed help before, and now did. She knew what she was looking at. "I'm not pitying you," she said before he could say whatever was coming next. "I'm picking up papers." He crossed the distance between them fast enough that she held her ground on instinct rather than choice. He stopped close enough that she could see the fine scar tissue along his jaw. "You have a look," he said. His voice was very quiet. "When you think I can't see you using it, a clinical look, like you're cataloguing." Daphne thought about lying. "Occupational habit," she said instead. "I'm sorry." Something shifted in his face. Not softened. Prescott Daine did not appear to have a setting that could be described as softened, but something behind the grey eye recalibrated. "Keep the papers," he said. He walked back to the desk. "We have an event Saturday, the Hospital for Sick Children Benefit Gala at the Apple Salon. You'll attend." "As your medical attendant." "As my companion." He sat down and opened his laptop. "I require a functional presence at my side, not someone trailing me with a blood pressure cuff. Wear something appropriate." "I'll make a note," Daphne said. She left with the papers, and she did not let herself think about the look on his face until she was back in her room with the door closed, and then she thought about it rather more than she intended to. The Apple Salon at the Toronto Reference Library had been done up in the predictable way of charitable galas. Ambient lighting, an open bar of considerable quality, and a room full of people whose net worth was only slightly exceeded by their mutual suspicion of each other. Prescott moved through it, the way he moved through the penthouse. Deliberately, with the environmental adjustments of a man who had spent 6 months learning to account for a blind side without letting anyone see the accounting. He had fastened the clasp of a thin gold chain at the back of her neck before they left, standing behind her while she held her hair up, his fingers cool and precise against her skin. She had not said anything, neither had he. They had gone downstairs. Renard Wolsey materialized within the first hour. He was silver-haired and built like a man who had once been athletic and was now approximately the shape of his desk, and he had a handshake for Prescott and a look for Daphne that she catalogued and filed under problem. "Daine." Wolsey pumped his hand with the exaggerated warmth of someone who wanted something. "Good to see you out and about." There were people worried after Kandahar. "Unfounded concern," Prescott said pleasantly. "The firm is performing ahead of projection." Sure. Wolsey swirled his drink. His eyes moved to Daphne. "And who's this?" "Daphne Arnett," Daphne said. "Ah." Wolsey looked from her to Prescott and back with the theatrical subtlety of a man who had never bothered to develop any. "A caretaker situation, very thoughtful." "A man in your position, Daine. Reduced operational capacity, sensory deficit. It makes sense to have someone managing the domestic side, freeing up whatever cognitive resources remain." The room did not go quiet, but Daphne felt the attention of the nearest cluster of guests shift toward them the way heat moves. She had spent 4 years in nursing school studying the body. She had spent 4 years learning, specifically, that what looked like damage from the outside was almost never the full picture. She had also spent 27 years learning when to be quiet and when not to be, and she had recently updated her assessment of that particular calculation. "Mr. Wolsey," she said. Her voice carried a coolness she hadn't planned for. "I'm a nurse. Clinically speaking, sensory deficits are assessed by their functional impact, not their category. Mr. Daine has 0 cognitive deficits, and he compensates for his visual field loss with processing strategies that most people with full binocular vision never bother developing." She tilted her head. "A person's capacity to run a firm isn't determined by what they've lost. It's determined by what they do with what they have. You might find that true in your own operations as well. Though from what I understand of the Meridian situation, you've been having some difficulty demonstrating that lately." She didn't know the details of Meridian. She had the name from Bledsoe's conversation in the study. She used it like a flat stone on still water and watched the ripple move out. Wolsey's smile tightened until it stopped being a smile. Prescott looked at her. There was a quality to the way his left eye moved when something surprised him. A very slight realignment, a fraction of stillness. And she had learned to read it in the same way she'd learned to read everything else she wasn't supposed to be noticing. "You'll have to forgive Daphne," Prescott said to Woolsey, his voice smooth and utterly without apology. "She has very little patience for imprecision, in any field." Woolsey made a sound and turned away. Daphne kept her face arranged appropriately for 30 seconds. Then the lights went out. The darkness lasted perhaps 2 seconds before the screaming started. The gunfire was already underway. Automatic short bursts from near the main entrance. Someone triggered the emergency lighting. In the sick amber glow, Daphne saw masked figures with weapons fanning through the crowd by the doors. Prescott's hand closed around her wrist from her right side. Her right side, which meant he'd moved to cover the angle he couldn't see from, and had done it before she'd processed what was happening. Service stairs, behind the catering station now. She moved. He moved with her, not pulling, not directing, moving with her. She realized she was navigating because she had been to this venue twice before during hospital auxiliary events, and her brain had a map of it that her feet apparently still knew. She took them around the catering station, through a service door, and down 2 flights of concrete stairs before she had even articulated the thought. A corridor at the bottom, loading access. 2 figures appeared at the far end. In here, she shoved open a utility door, housekeeping storage, lemon and bleach, linen carts stacked to the ceiling. She dragged it shut behind them. No lock. She wedged a cart against it, then a second. Prescott was already scanning the room on his left, the side he could see. She went right without being asked. "Clear," she said. "Clear," he said. They stood in the dark and listened. Footsteps in the corridor, a voice murmuring, then quiet. Daphne let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Then she made the mistake she'd been telling herself not to make for 3 weeks. She turned on her phone light and started checking him. Right arm, right shoulder, right side of the neck. The cut above his eye she'd already noted. Superficial, arterial pressure adequate. She was moving to his ribs when he caught her wrist. "I'm not broken, Daphne." His voice was barely above a rasp in the dark. He pulled her forward until she had to look up at him, at the eye patch, at the scar, at the single grey eye that was absolutely steady and absolutely serious. "Do you think half my vision means half my mind?" She looked at him. Really looked. Not the clinical way he'd named and objected to, but the other way she had been carefully not using for 3 weeks, standing in doorways and hallways and quiet kitchens at dawn. "No," she said clearly, no qualification. He held that for a moment. His thumb moved once across the inside of her wrist. "Good," he said. He did not let go right away. The sounds outside shifted. Someone tried the corridor door and moved on. Prescott released her wrist and stepped back. He pulled out his phone with his left hand and sent a text with the focused, single-handed efficiency of someone who had stopped pretending 6 months ago. A response came back in under 10 seconds. "Cutter has the south exit." He looked at her. "You knew this building." "Hospital auxiliary," she said, "twice a year." "Did you plan the route?" She had not planned it consciously. She had noticed the exits the way she noticed veins when she met someone. Automatic. Filed without effort. "I just knew where they were," she said. Something moved in his face. "Then led," he said. She led. Cutter's van was parked on a side street off Asquith, and he drove them north without being told where, which meant he already had a location. Prescott sat across from Daphne in the back, jacket gone, dress shirt open at the collar, blood from the cut dried at his temple. He did not look damaged. He looked like a man taking inventory. "It was Bledsoe," he said, not a question. "The Meridian comment rattled Woolsey," Daphne said. "I guessed." "You guessed correctly." He looked at her for a long moment. "Bledsoe has been feeding Woolsey our operational framework for at least 3 months. He believes I can no longer protect the firm. He believes he can hand Woolsey the board vote and take controlling interest." He paused. "He is wrong about the board. He has been wrong about it since January. I have been watching. She felt the weight of that settle over the van. He'd known. He'd watched Bledsoe run the full length of the rope without saying a word. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Prescott said, "Bledsoe will learn that I see more clearly with one eye than he does with two." The safe house was a facility in Burlington that looked like a commercial property from the outside and suggested, from the inside, that Prescott Daine had prepared for exactly this moment with the same attention he gave everything else. There were people there, quiet, efficient, not asking unnecessary questions, and a central table lined with monitors and communications equipment that Prescott moved to without pause. Daphne did not go to the room they showed her. She got coffee from the industrial machine in the corner and set a cup beside Prescott's left hand and stood there, and nobody told her to leave. After a while, nobody seemed to think about it. She had been in hospitals long enough to know that people who stayed calm and carried their weight became invisible in the best possible way. Over the next 48 hours, she watched Prescott dismantle Harmon Bledsoe's ambitions with the precision of a procedure. He identified which of Bledsoe's proxy votes were genuinely secured and which had been promised and not yet delivered. He made calls. He sent people. He held a 17-minute video conference with 3 board members that would have required 2 weeks' preparation for anyone else. And he conducted it in his shirt sleeves, at 2 in the morning, with the same unhurried authority he brought to everything. On the second night, they brought Bledsoe in. Not roughly. Prescott wasn't interested in spectacle. But Bledsoe was there, and he was pale, and the particular confidence he had worn in the penthouse hallway 3 weeks ago was nowhere visible. Prescott did not stand when Bledsoe entered. He was at the main table, back to the window, a cup of coffee at his left hand, looking at the monitor in front of him. "Harmon," he said, "nothing else." Bledsoe looked around the room, at Cutter, at the 2 people standing near the door, at Daphne, who was against the far wall, and whose presence he seemed to find unexpectedly disconcerting. "Presk, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You negotiated exclusive access to our Vancouver operational data with Woolsey's team beginning in November." Prescott's voice was without inflection. "You identified 11 board members you believed could be brought to a no-confidence vote. You were right about 7 of them. You were wrong about the other 4. He turned the monitor toward Bledsoe. "You also did not account for the fact that I have had those 11 conversations myself, beginning in December. The proxies you believe you have secured are, as of this morning, transferred. The board vote, if it proceeds, confirms my operational authority." He paused. "The vote will not proceed. You resigned this morning, effective immediately. Cutter has your letter." Bledsoe's face moved through several expressions, landing finally on recognition. "You knew," he said, "the whole time." Prescott's voice dropped to something that moved through the room like a pressure change. "I have one eye, Harmon." He looked at Bledsoe with the grey eye that had never stopped watching, that had been watching since January, that had catalogued every maneuver and every miscalculation with complete and patient clarity. "Did you think that meant I couldn't see what you were doing?" Bledsoe opened his mouth. "You are done," Prescott said simply, completely, in the voice of a man identifying a fact. Cutter moved. It was nearly 4 in the morning when Prescott came to find her. She was in the small anteroom off the main corridor, shoes off, her phone open to clinical notes she'd been updating out of habit, trying to determine if she was exhausted enough to sleep. She was not. She heard him before she saw him. The deliberate footfall of a man who had learned to make the most of what he could hear since losing the vision that would have given him equivalent information about space. He stopped in the doorway. "It's done," he said. Daphne looked up at him. The eye patch, the scar, the exhausted set of his shoulders, and the single grey eye watching her with the same quality of attention she'd felt on the second morning in the kitchen and had been carefully setting aside ever since. "I know," she said. He came into the room and sat down beside her, not across from, not at the head of something. And the couch was narrow and his shoulder was an inch from hers. "You built the escape tonight from spatial memory," he said, "without planning it in advance." "I didn't build it," she said. "I just walked us through it." "That's the same thing." He turned his head, and she was aware of the small habituated pivot that let his left eye take her in directly. "In Kandahar, what I lost first wasn't the vision. It was the confidence in the information I still had. I kept second-guessing what I could see, because I'd lost what I couldn't." He was quiet for a moment. "You have never second-guessed your information. Not once in 3 weeks." Daphne thought about that honestly. "Clinical training," she said. "You trust the assessment or you don't." "Yes." He was still looking at her. "You trusted yours tonight, in a dark building, under fire, with automatic weapons 40 meters away." "I knew the building," she said. "That helped." Daphne. Her name in his voice had a different quality at 4 in the morning with no one else in the room. "I am not complimenting your navigational recall." She looked at him. The grey eye was very steady. "Oh," she said. "You told Woolsey that capacity is determined by what a person does with what they have." He reached out and his left hand, calloused, controlled, found her jaw, tilting it up slightly. "I have been watching you use everything you have for 3 weeks, with some considerable attention." "I noticed," she said. Her voice came out lower than she intended. "Good," he said. "Then this won't surprise you." He kissed her the way he did everything, without hesitation, with complete focus, with the precise attention of a man who had no interest in doing something unless he was going to do it properly. Daphne's clinical detachment, which had been failing its job for weeks, gave up entirely. When he pulled back, his thumb was at her cheekbone, and his hand was warm and grounding. "Your brother's debt is settled regardless," he said. "I want that stated clearly." She almost laughed. "You're negotiating terms at 4 in the morning after." "I negotiate everything. It's a professional reflex." The edge of his mouth moved barely, but she had learned to read it. "Remain here, not as a medical attendant, not as a contractual obligation." Daphne looked at him. The scar, the eye patch, the exhausted and entirely undiminished man beside her, watching her with the grey eye that saw everything worth seeing. "You already knew I wasn't leaving," she said. The almost smile settled into something real. "I am beginning," said Prescott Daine, "to suspect you are the most dangerous person I have brought into this building." She reached up and pressed her hand flat against his chest, over his heart, steady and sure, the way she checked for a rhythm she already knew was there. "Then you're in good hands," she said. "There is a particular kind of strength that no boardroom assessment or operational briefing will ever fully account for. The kind that navigates a dark building from memory under fire. The kind that stands in a room full of powerful men and speaks with a clear voice. The kind that stays when it has every reason to leave." Harmon Bledsoe would discover, in the months that followed, what it meant to move against a firm whose leadership had been sharpened by loss rather than softened by it. Renard Woolsey's Meridian bid collapsed. The way things built on borrowed confidence tend to collapse, quietly, completely, without anyone left to argue otherwise. And at the quarterly board meeting that autumn, Prescott Daine presented the firm's performance figures from the head of the table, with Daphne Arnett seated to his left, where his sight was clean and clear, and no one in that room made the mistake of looking at him as anything other than exactly what he was. He had one eye, he saw everything.